The Zalathi Empire owned the galaxy. For 3,000 years, their crystal ships had crossed the stars, bringing order to chaos and civilization to the wild. From the core worlds where their great cities floated in the clouds, to the rim territories, where new species waited to be discovered, the Empire's reach was absolute. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars through the massive viewing portal. His scales shimmered with the deep purple color that marked his noble birth, and the golden implants along his skull pulsed with the steady rhythm of a being in complete control. Around him, his officers worked at their stations with the quiet efficiency that had made the Zalathi the masters of known space. Admiral, his aide approached with the measured steps that protocol demanded. The conquest of the Moran system is complete. Their governing council has surrendered unconditionally. Vextar nodded without turning from the stars. Another species, added to the Empire's vast collection. The Mirans would be catalogued, their technology studied, their culture preserved in the great archives, and their world integrated into the imperial system. It was the natural order of things. "How many does that make?" Vextar asked. 4,312 conquered species, Admiral, plus 217 extinct civilizations that we have documented. 4,000 species, and yet Vextar felt a strange emptiness. He had risen through the ranks by being thorough, by studying every campaign, every conquest, every piece of data in the Imperial archives. But lately, he had noticed something that troubled him. Gaps in the records. Small inconsistencies that most would overlook. "Aide Kessenal," Vextar turned to face his subordinate. "Bring me the complete star charts for the outer rim sectors." "Yes, Admiral. All sectors? All of them, including the restricted zones." Kessenal hesitated for just a moment. "Admiral, some of those charts require special clearance from the High Command. Then get the clearance, I want to see everything." 3 days later, Vextar sat alone in his private chambers, surrounded by holographic displays showing the galaxy in all its mapped glory. The Empire's territory spread before him like a vast web, with trade routes and military installations, marking their complete dominance. But there, in the outer reaches of the spiral arm where Terra's sun was supposed to be, lay something that made no sense. A sphere of empty space. No trade routes passed through it. No military patrols entered it. No exploration teams had ever filed reports from within its boundaries. According to the charts, this region was marked only as Quarantine Zone Omega-7, with a notation that made Vexitar's scales ripple with confusion. Permanent Exclusion Zone, by order of the High Command, established stardate 28473300E. Years ago. But why would the Empire quarantine empty space? Vextar began digging deeper into the archives, using his considerable rank to access files that few beings had ever seen. What he found were fragments, pieces of reports that had been carefully edited, references to something called the Terra incident with all details classified beyond his security level. Most intriguing of all, he found a single line in an old military report that had somehow escaped the censors. Human resistance was more significant than anticipated. Recommend complete orbital bombardment of all inhabited worlds. Humans. Vextar had never heard of such a species, yet here was evidence that they had once existed, somewhere in that forbidden zone, a species that had apparently fought back hard enough to warrant orbital bombardment. But if they had been wiped out, why maintain a quarantine for 3 centuries? The Admiral spent weeks gathering more fragments, ancient supply requisitions that mentioned Terra campaign, medical reports treating injuries from something called kinetic weapons, engineering reports analyzing strange technology that seemed to violate accepted principles of physics. Most telling of all, a promotion list that showed dozens of officers receiving combat decorations for actions in the Sol system. Sol. Vextar cross-referenced the name with stellar cartography and found it buried in the old files. A yellow star on the inner edge of Quarantine Zone Omega-7. According to the ancient records, it had been home to a species that called themselves humans. The reports were sparse, but they painted a picture of a young civilization that had just begun to explore space when the Empire found them. The more Vextar learned, the more questions arose. If the humans had been primitive, why had the campaign taken 3 full cycles to complete? Why were there references to unexpected technological adaptation and rapid evolution of enemy tactics? Why had the Empire lost 17 dreadnoughts against a species that shouldn't have posed any threat? Most importantly, why was the zone still quarantined if everything in it was dead? Vextar's obsession with the mystery grew stronger each day. He began to neglect his duties, spending all his time in the archives or staring at the star charts of the Forbidden Zone. His officers noticed the change in their admiral, but none dared to question him directly. Still, whispers began to spread through the fleet. One night, as Vextar studied the fragmentary records for the 100th time, he made a decision that would change everything. He activated his personal communicator and sent encrypted messages to 3 of his most trusted captains. All were beings he had served with for decades. All were ambitious enough to follow him into the unknown, and all were curious about what lay in the darkness beyond the Empire's borders. Captain Vorth of the Dreadnought Dominion was the first to respond. A veteran warrior whose red scales bore the ritual scars of 50 campaigns, he had always hungered for a challenge worthy of his skills. Captain Yelan of the Battlecruiser Supremacy came next. Her silver scales marked her as a member of the Explorer caste, and she had made her reputation mapping unknown regions of space. Captain Zekmor of the Heavy Cruiser Conquest was the last to answer, but his response was the most enthusiastic. He had always felt that the Empire had grown too comfortable, too certain of its superiority. The idea of facing an unknown challenge appealed to his warrior's spirit. Vextar called them to his flagship for a secret meeting. In the secured briefing room, he shared everything he had discovered about the mysterious quarantine zone and the species called humans. "This makes no sense," Captain Vorth said, studying the star charts. "If this region was sterilized 300 years ago, why is it still forbidden?" "Perhaps," Captain Yelan suggested, "there are resources there that the High Command wants to keep secret, rare minerals or ancient artifacts." Captain Zekmor leaned back in his chair, his scales shifting to the dark blue that indicated deep thought. "Or perhaps something survived." The room fell silent. The idea that anything could survive orbital bombardment by the Empire's fleet was almost unthinkable. Yet the evidence suggested that something was still in that zone, something important, enough to keep it sealed for 3 centuries. "Whatever the truth," Vextar said finally, "we will never know unless we investigate. The High Command has kept this secret for too long. We have the right to know what lies in our own galaxy." The 4 officers spent the next several hours planning their expedition. They would need a fleet large enough to handle any threat they might find, but small enough to avoid drawing attention from the High Command. 12 ships seemed ideal. 4 dreadnoughts to provide heavy firepower, 4 battle cruisers for reconnaissance and speed, and 4 support vessels to handle logistics and communications. Gathering such a force without arousing suspicion would take time and careful planning. Each captain would need to recruit their crews from among the most loyal and adventurous members of the fleet. They would need supplies for an extended mission, since they had no idea what they might find in the quarantine zone. Most importantly, they would need to prepare for the possibility that they were wrong about the humans being extinct. If something had survived in that forbidden region for 3 centuries, it had learned to stay hidden from the Empire's censors. That suggested a level of technology and cunning that demanded respect. Over the following months, the 4 officers quietly assembled their expedition fleet. They used their authority to request ships for extended patrol duties and deep space reconnaissance missions. They gathered supplies under the cover of routine military exercises. Most delicately of all, they selected crews who could be trusted to follow orders without asking too many questions. The night before their departure, Vextar stood alone on his bridge, looking out at the 11 other ships that would accompany him into the unknown. Each vessel represented the pinnacle of Zalathi technology. Their energy shields could turn aside any known weapon. Their quantum engines could cross vast distances in the blink of an eye. Their sensors could detect a single life form on a planet from light years away. Surely, whatever lay in the quarantine zone could not stand against such power. As his fleet prepared to jump into hyperspace, Vextar felt a mixture of excitement and unease. He was about to solve one of the Empire's greatest mysteries. To explore a region that had been forbidden for longer than most beings had been alive. History would remember him as the admiral who opened the final frontier. He could not have imagined that history would remember him for something else entirely. That his name would become synonymous not with discovery, but with the beginning of the end of everything the Empire had built. The hyperspace engines engaged with a low hum that resonated through the hull. 12 ships vanished from Imperial space, carrying with them the hopes and ambitions of their crews. None of them suspected that they were not explorers heading into the unknown. They were messengers carrying word to humanity that their long isolation was about to end. The stars ahead held secrets that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. In the darkness of the quarantine zone, something waited. Something that had spent 300 years preparing for this moment. The Empire had taught the humans many lessons during their first encounter. Soon, it would learn that humans had been very good students indeed. The transition from hyperspace was smooth, exactly as Admiral Vextar had expected. His fleet of 12 ships materialized at the edge of Quarantine Zone Omega-7, their sensors immediately beginning to scan the space ahead. What they found defied every expectation. Admiral, the sensor operator's voice carried a note of confusion. I'm reading multiple energy signatures throughout the system. Large ones. Vextar moved to the sensor station, his golden implants pulsing faster as he processed what he was seeing. The display showed dozens of contacts scattered across the solar system. Space stations, orbital habitats, mining platforms, industrial complexes that rivaled anything in the Empire's core worlds. That's impossible, Captain Vorth said from his position at the tactical station. This system was supposed to be dead sterilized. Run a full spectral analysis, Vextar ordered. I want to know what we're looking at. The results that came back made no sense according to everything the Zalathi knew about technology and physics. The readings showed structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, energy patterns that violated the basic laws of thermodynamics. Most disturbing of all, the signatures suggested a level of technological advancement that should have been impossible for any species in this region of the galaxy. Admiral, the communications officer spoke up. I'm detecting artificial signals throughout the system, organized transmissions between the various structures. And sir, some of them are directed at us. What kind of signals? Standard mathematical progressions, followed by what appears to be a translation matrix. They're trying to establish communication. Vextar felt his scales shift to the deep blue color that indicated fascination mixed with caution. Whatever lived in this system was not only alive and technologically advanced, but intelligent enough to attempt peaceful first contact. This was not what the archives had suggested about humanity. Open a channel, he ordered. Let's see what they have to say. The main display flickered and resolved into an image that made several of the bridge crew step backward in surprise. The being that appeared was clearly not Zalathi, but neither did it match any of the known species in the Imperial databases. It had pale skin, bilateral symmetry, and most unusually, tiny eyes set in a relatively flat face. But what struck Vextar most was its expression. This creature looked calm, confident, and completely unsurprised by their arrival. I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation, the being said in perfect Zalathi. Welcome to Sol System. I assume you are Admiral Vextar of the Zalathi Empire. The use of his name sent a chill through Vextar's scales. How could they possibly know who he was? His fleet had only just arrived, and their approach had been undetected by any Imperial sensors. How do you know my name? Vextar asked, working to keep his voice steady. Commander Chen smiled, showing small white teeth. We've been monitoring your fleet since you left Zalathi space 6 days ago. Your communications weren't as secure as you thought. We know why you're here, Admiral. You're looking for answers about what happened 300 years ago. You're human, Vextar stated. It wasn't a question. Yes, We're the species your empire tried to exterminate, the ones you thought you had wiped out completely. Chen's expression remained pleasant, but something cold flickered in those small eyes. We've been waiting a long time for the Empire to return. Around the bridge, Vextar's officers exchanged worried glances. This was not how first contact with a primitive species was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to be awed by the Empire's superior technology, grateful for the opportunity to join the galactic community under Imperial rule. Your records suggest that this system was sterilized, Vextar said carefully. How did you survive? Your records are incomplete, Chen replied. Yes, you bombarded our worlds from orbit. You killed billions of our people. You destroyed our cities and poisoned our atmosphere. But you made a mistake. You assumed that destroying our planets would destroy our spirit. The display shifted to show images that made Vextar's implants pulse with shock. Massive space habitats, each one large enough to house millions of beings. Generation ships that stretched for kilometers. Hidden bases built into asteroids and moons. The humans hadn't just survived the Empire's attack, they had thrived. While your Empire was busy conquering the galaxy, Chen continued, we were rebuilding, learning, growing stronger. We've had 3 centuries to study your tactics, your technology, your weaknesses. We know everything about you, Admiral. Everything. That's impossible, Captain Vorth interjected from his ship. No species could advance so far in such a short time. Our technology is the result of millions of years of development. Chen's smile widened. Your mistake is assuming that advancement follows a linear path. When your survival depends on it, evolution can be remarkably fast. We had excellent teachers. Teachers? You, Admiral. Your Empire. Every ship you sent against us, every weapon you used, every tactic you employed, we studied it all. We learned from our defeats, and then we improved on what we learned. Vextar felt a growing unease. This conversation was not proceeding according to any protocol he knew. First contact with a new species was supposed to be a simple matter. The Empire would demonstrate its superior power. The new species would submit, and integration would begin. But these humans seemed neither impressed nor intimidated by his fleet. I have 12 dreadnoughts, Vextar said, allowing a note of warning to enter his voice. The most powerful ships in the galaxy. Surely you can see the wisdom of cooperation. 12 ships. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Yes, we counted them. Impressive vessels. But Admiral, you seem to be operating under a false assumption. You think you came here as conquerors, but you're actually guests. Unwelcome guests, I'm afraid, but guests nonetheless. Before Vextar could respond, his sensor operator spoke up with obvious alarm. Admiral, I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the system. Something's happening. The tactical display lit up like a festival celebration. Energy signatures that had seemed like passive installations suddenly revealed their true nature. Weapons platforms, defense stations, ship construction facilities, and emerging from hidden positions throughout the system, vessels that defied every principle of Imperial ship design. The human ships were smaller than the Zalathi dreadnoughts, but they moved with impossible grace through space. Their hulls seemed to shimmer and shift, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes translucent. And there were hundreds of them. As I said, Chen's voice remained conversational. We've been preparing for your return. We want to make something very clear to you, Admiral. This is Terran space. It has been Terran space for 300 years. You are not welcome here. You dare threaten the Empire? Vextar's scales shifted to the bright red of anger. You are a single species in a single system. We rule thousands of worlds. Yes, you do, Chen agreed. For now. But that's about to change. You see, Admiral, you've just made the same mistake your predecessors did. You've assumed that because we're human, we must be weak. That because we're few in number, we must be helpless. That because we were once your victims, we will always be your victims. The human ships began to move into formation around the Imperial fleet. They didn't approach directly, but instead took up positions that would allow them to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. It was a classic military maneuver, one that Vextar recognized from his own tactical training. You have 36 hours to withdraw from Terran space, Chen announced. "This is your only warning. After that time expires, we will consider your continued presence an act of war." The audacity of it stunned Vextar into momentary silence. A single species, isolated in one system, was threatening the Empire. It was beyond comprehension. It was madness. "You cannot be serious," he finally managed. "Do you have any idea what you're facing? The Empire has fleets that could darken the sky of every world in this system. We have weapons that could crack planets. We have resources beyond your ability to imagine." "Yes," Chen replied calmly. "We know exactly what you have. We've been watching you use it on others for 3 centuries. But Admiral, there's something you don't seem to understand. We're not the same species you fought before. We've evolved. We've adapted. We've become something new." The display showed close-up images of the human ships, and Vextar felt his certainty begin to waver. The vessels incorporated design elements he had never seen before, hull configurations that seemed to bend space around them, weapon systems that appeared to exist partially outside normal reality. Most disturbing of all, he could see that the humans had somehow integrated technology from dozens of different species. Zalathi energy systems, Miran shield generators, Korthek engines, and other components he couldn't identify. "How?" he whispered. "Simple," Chen answered. "We learned from everyone you conquered. Every species that fell to your empire. Every technology you claimed as your own. We've been collecting. Refugees, Admiral. Survivors who escaped your conquest fleets. They brought their knowledge with them. And we've spent 3 centuries combining it into something greater than the sum of its parts." The realization hit Vextar like a physical blow. The Empire's greatest strength had been its diversity, its ability to incorporate the best technologies and ideas from each conquered species. But somehow, the humans had been doing the same thing, building their own technological base from the survivors of Imperial expansion. "This is your final warning." Chen's voice had lost all warmth. 36 hours, Admiral. Use that time wisely." The communication channel closed, leaving Vextar and his officers staring at a display full of impossible ships arranged in perfect attack formation around their fleet. The Admiral looked around his bridge, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in the faces of his crew. "Admiral," Captain Vorth's voice came through the intership communication system. "What are your orders?" Vextar straightened his shoulders and forced his scales back to their normal purple color. He was an admiral of the Zalathi Empire, heir to 3,000 years of unbroken victory. No single species could stand against the Empire's might, no matter how advanced they claimed to be. "We proceed as planned," he announced. "Deploy the fleet in standard attack formation. Charge all weapon systems. Raise shields to maximum power." "Admiral," Captain Yilan interjected, "perhaps we should consider their warning. We came here seeking information, not war." "There will be no retreat," Vextar declared. "The Empire does not negotiate with rebels and terrorists. These humans will submit to Imperial authority, or they will be destroyed, just as they should have been 3 centuries ago." As his fleet moved into battle formation, Vextar felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came before combat. Soon, the humans would learn the price of defying the Empire. Soon, their impossible ships and impossible technologies would be reduced to debris floating in the void. He could not have known that in the hidden depths of the human fleet, old veterans were sharing grim smiles. They had waited 300 years for this moment. 300 years to show the Empire what humanity had learned from their first devastating encounter. The hunters had returned to find that their prey had become predators, and the real lesson was about to begin. Admiral Vextar watched the countdown timer on his command display as it approached 0. 36 hours had passed since the human ultimatum, and his fleet remained in Sol system, weapons charged and shields at maximum power. Around him, his officers waited for the order that would begin the battle. "All ships report ready for combat, Admiral," Captain Vorth announced from the Dominion. "The humans have maintained their positions but made no aggressive moves." Vextar nodded, studying the tactical display. The human ships still surrounded his fleet in that peculiar formation, maintaining what appeared to be a respectful distance. Their behavior suggested either supreme confidence or complete madness. He suspected it was madness. "Open a channel to all human vessels," he ordered. "Let me speak to their commander." The main display flickered to life, showing Commander Chen, exactly as she had appeared before. Her expression was calm, almost sad, as if she was attending a funeral rather than preparing for battle. "Admiral," she said simply, "have you decided to withdraw?" "The Empire does not withdraw," Vextar replied. "You have had your chance to surrender peacefully. Now you will face the consequences of your defiance." Chen closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, Vextar saw something that chilled him. Pity. "I'm sorry it has come to this," she said quietly. "We really hoped you would be different, that you would have learned something from your history, but I suppose some lessons can only be taught through demonstration." "Enough talk," Vextar snarled. "All ships, open fire." The Imperial fleet unleashed its fury in a coordinated barrage that should have reduced the human vessels to scattered atoms. Energy beams that could melt through a planet's crust lanced across space. Quantum torpedoes capable of destroying entire cities streaked toward their targets. The void between the fleets lit up like a new star being born. And then something impossible happened. The human ships simply weren't there anymore. "Report!" Vextar shouted as his weapons found empty space. "Admiral," his sensor operator's voice cracked with confusion. "The targets just vanished. No hyperspace signatures, no warp trails. They just disappeared." "That's impossible. No ship can—" The sentence was cut off as the Conquest Captain Zekmor's heavy cruiser suddenly shuddered under a devastating impact. Alarms began screaming across the communication channels as similar attacks struck 6 other ships simultaneously. "Where are they firing from?" Vextar demanded, watching as his tactical display showed his ships taking damage from weapons that, apparently, didn't exist. "Unknown, Admiral," the tactical officer replied, his scales pale with fear. "I'm reading impact signatures but no firing positions. It's as if the shots are coming from empty space." Captain Yeelan's voice crackled through the communication system, tight with pain. "Supremacy taking heavy damage. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Whatever they're using, it's punching right through our shields like they're not there." Vextar stared at his displays in growing horror. The pride of the Imperial fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy he couldn't even see. His shields, the most advanced defensive technology in the galaxy, were useless. His sensors, capable of detecting a single molecule at interstellar distances, couldn't locate the attackers. "Admiral," his communications officer called out. "Incoming transmission from the humans." Commander Chen appeared on screen again, but now she was clearly aboard a warship. Behind her, Vexatar could see human crew members working at stations that looked nothing like anything in the Imperial databases. "I told you we had learned from our previous encounter," Chen said. 300 years ago, your empire taught us that conventional tactics would never be enough to defeat superior numbers, so we developed unconventional ones." As if to demonstrate her point, another of Vextar's ships, the destroyer Retribution, simply broke apart as invisible weapons, tore through its hull with surgical precision. "What are you using?" Vextar asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Phase shift technology," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "We learned to exist partially outside your reality. Your sensors can't detect us because we're not entirely in your dimension. Your shields can't stop us because we're firing from angles that don't exist in 3-dimensional space." "That's impossible," Vexatar protested. "The laws of physics are more flexible than your empire believed," Chen finished. "When your survival depends on it, you learn to think outside conventional limitations. The refugees from Altair Prime brought us quantum mechanics theories your scientists dismissed as impossible. The Korthak survivors taught us about dimensional manipulation. The Vegan resistance shared their knowledge of space-time distortion. We combined it all into something new." Another ship, the battlecruiser Victory, was suffering catastrophic damage. Captain Tivar's desperate voice came through the communications. "We can't fight what we can't see. Request permission to retreat." "There will be no retreat," Vextar roared. But even as he said it, he knew his situation was hopeless. His fleet was being picked apart by an enemy that could strike from anywhere, while remaining completely invisible. "Your weapons are impressive," Chen continued conversationally, as if she wasn't currently orchestrating the destruction of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. "But they're designed to fight enemies who play by the same rules you do. We stopped playing by those rules a long time ago." The Dominion, Vextar's most powerful dreadnought, suddenly listed to one side as something tore through its engine compartment. Captain Vorth's voice, usually so steady and confident, was now edged with panic. "Admiral, we've lost main power. Whatever hit us, it's like they knew exactly where to aim." "Of course we know where to aim," Chen said, apparently hearing the transmission. "We've been studying your ship designs for 3 centuries. We know every weakness, every vulnerable point, every critical system. Your technology hasn't changed significantly since the First War. Ours has evolved beyond your ability to comprehend." As if to prove her point, the human ships suddenly reappeared all around the Imperial fleet. But now they were inside the formation, having somehow materialized within the protective envelope of Vextar's own shields. The human vessels were nothing like the sleek, crystalline ships of the Empire. They looked organic somehow, their hulls flowing and shifting like living things. Weapons emerged from what had appeared to be empty space, targeting critical systems with impossible accuracy. "How?" Vextar whispered, watching as his proud fleet was systematically dismantled. "We learned the most important lesson of all," Chen replied. "We learned to adapt. Your empire has spent 3,000 years conquering species that fought the way you expected them to fight. Species that used similar technologies, similar tactics, similar strategies. But we're not like them, Admiral. We're human." The flagship's weapons officer spoke up desperately. "Admiral, should I target the human commander's ship?" Vextar looked at the tactical display, trying to identify which of the organic-looking vessels might be Chen's command ship. But as he watched, he realized something that made his scales turn white with terror. The human ships were all identical. There was no command vessel, no obvious leader, no single point of failure he could target. "They're networked," he breathed. "They're all sharing the same tactical information. Destroy one and the others instantly adapt." "Very good, Admiral," Chen nodded approvingly. "Another lesson we learned from you. Hierarchical command structures are a weakness. Single points of failure can be exploited. So we developed a distributed command system. Every ship is a command ship. Every captain is an admiral. Destroy half our fleet and the remainder fights just as effectively." The battle cruiser Supremacy exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its fusion reactors overloading as human weapons found their precise target. Captain Yilan's final transmission was a simple, "Tell the Empire. Tell them we were wrong." Vextar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3,000 years of Imperial pride crushing down on him. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. His mighty fleet, the most powerful force ever assembled, was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought according to no known rules of warfare. "Why?" he asked, opening his eyes to look at Chen's image. "Why don't you just destroy us all at once?" Chen's expression grew sad again. "Because we're not like you, Admiral. We don't enjoy killing. We're doing this to send a message, not to satisfy bloodlust. Every ship we disable instead of destroy, every crew we allow to escape in life pods, every captain we spare, it's all part of the lesson we're teaching." "What lesson?" "That the age of the Empire is over. That there are things in this galaxy stronger than your fleets, smarter than your strategies, and more determined than your ambitions. We've spent 300 years preparing for this moment, Admiral. 300 years learning everything we could about you, while you learned nothing about us." The heavy cruiser Conquest was the next to fall, its hull splitting open like a flower as something tore through its structural supports. Captain Zekmore managed to get his crew to the escape pods before the reactor breach, but his ship was gone. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender, signals from the Defender and the Vanguard. Both ships have lost weapons and engines." Vextar looked around his bridge at his remaining officers. He saw fear in their faces, but also something else. The dawning realization that everything they had believed about the Empire's invincibility was wrong. "Your fleet is finished," Chen said gently, "but you still have a choice. Surrender now and we'll allow your surviving crews to return to Imperial space. Continue fighting and we'll be forced to destroy you all." "And if we surrender?" Vexitar asked, his voice barely audible. "Then you go home. You report what you've seen here. You tell your high command that humanity is no longer hiding in the shadows. Tell them that the quarantine they established to keep us contained was actually protecting them from us. Tell them that their empire's greatest mistake was teaching us to be better than they are." The admiral looked at his tactical display one final time. Of his 12 proud ships, only 4 were still capable of fighting, and they were vastly outnumbered by human vessels that could attack from impossible angles with weapons that ignored every known defense. "All ships," he said quietly, "stand down. Lower shields and power down weapons." "A wise choice," Chen nodded. "We'll escort you to the edge of our space. From there, you can return to your empire and deliver our message." "What message?" Vexitar asked. Commander Chen's image smiled, but there was steel in her eyes. "Tell them that humanity remembers. Tell them that we've learned from every lesson they taught us. And tell them that if they ever enter our space again, we won't be as merciful as we were today." The transmission ended, leaving Vexitar alone with the wreckage of his ambitions and the terrible knowledge of what the Empire would soon face. The humans had given him a demonstration of their power, but he understood that it was only a fraction of what they were capable of. As human ships moved to escort his battered fleet out of the system, Vexitar wondered if he was carrying a warning to the Empire or a death sentence. The hunters had returned to find that their prey had become something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The real war was about to begin. The great council chamber of the Empire had never witnessed such chaos. Admiral Vexitar stood before the curved table where the 12 high overlords sat in their crystalline thrones, his once proud uniform now bearing the scars of his defeat. Behind him, holographic displays showed the wreckage of his fleet and the impossible recordings of human ships that could exist outside normal space. "This is madness," High Overlord Zenkari declared, his ancient scales shifting to the deep red of outrage. "You claim that a single primitive species destroyed the pride of our fleet? That they possess technology beyond our understanding? Show them," Vexitar said quietly to his aide. The holographic recordings began to play again, showing the human vessels appearing and disappearing like ghosts, striking with weapons that seemed to fire from empty space. High Overlord Timos leaned forward, her silver implants pulsing rapidly, as she studied the data. "These readings are impossible. Our sensors would have detected any conventional cloaking system." "They're not using conventional technology," Vexitar explained for the third time. "The humans have somehow learned to exist partially outside our reality. They've combined technologies from dozens of species into something entirely new." "Impossible," another overlord scoffed. "No species could advance so far in such a short time. These must be fabrications, some attempt to cover up your incompetence." Vexitar felt his scales darken with shame and anger. "I have served this empire faithfully for 40 years. I have conquered 17 species and brought glory to our people. I would not fabricate such a humiliating defeat." "Then explain it," High Overlord Vexithera commanded from the central throne. At 3,000 years old, she was the eldest of the overlords, and the ultimate authority in the Empire. "How could we have missed such a threat for 3 centuries? "Because we didn't want to see it," Vexitar replied. "The quarantine zone wasn't just keeping the humans contained, it was keeping us ignorant. We convinced ourselves that the threat was eliminated, and we stopped paying attention to what was happening in that region of space." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For 300 years, while the Empire had been expanding, in other directions humanity had been growing stronger in their hidden refuge. "What are their numbers?" High Overlord Timos asked finally. "Unknown," Vexitar admitted. "They have industrial capacity that rivals our core worlds, but it's distributed across hundreds of hidden facilities. They could have millions of ships, for all we know. And their intentions? They made it clear. They consider themselves to be at war with us, and they have no interest in negotiation or surrender. They want revenge for what we did to them 3 centuries ago. High Overlord Zenkari slammed his fist against his throne. Then we destroy them, gather the Grand Fleet, mobilize every ship in the Empire. We'll turn their entire system into cosmic dust. With respect, High Overlord, Vextar said carefully. That approach failed once before. The humans have studied our tactics for 3 centuries. They know exactly how we fight, and they've developed counters for everything we might try. What do you suggest? High Overlord Vexithara asked. I suggest we prepare for a war unlike any we've ever fought. The humans won't come at us directly. They'll use the same tactics they used against my fleet. They'll strike from unexpected angles, using technology we can't counter, against targets we can't predict. As if summoned by his words, an aide rushed into the chamber carrying a communication tablet. His scales were pale with fear as he approached the High Overlord's throne. Forgive the interruption, he gasped. But we've just received emergency transmissions from 3 outer rim systems. They're under attack. The great display screens around the chamber lit up with incoming reports. The Kepler system, home to important mining operations. The Vega colony, a major agricultural world. The Proxima station, a vital communications relay. All 3 were reporting the same thing. Unknown ships had appeared without warning and were systematically destroying Imperial installations. How many ships? High Overlord Vexithara demanded. Unknown, the aide replied. The attackers are using the same technology the Admiral described. They appear and disappear without warning. Our forces can't get weapon locks on them. More reports flooded in over the next hour. 7 systems under attack. 12 military bases destroyed. An entire patrol fleet wiped out in the Altair system without managing to fire a single shot in return. The attacks were coordinated, precise, and utterly devastating. They're not just attacking randomly, Vextar realized as he studied the pattern of strikes. They're targeting our logistics network, communication relays, supply depots, fuel stations. They're trying to isolate our forces from each other. High Overlord Timos was manipulating her own tactical display, her expression growing more troubled by the minute. If they continue at this rate, they'll cripple our ability to coordinate a response within days. Impossible. High Overlord, Zenkari protested. They're only one species, we have ships in 1,000 systems. But our ships can't fight an enemy they can't see, Vextar pointed out. And the humans seem to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. They're not wasting time on heavily defended positions. They're going after soft targets that are crucial to our operations. The communication systems in the chamber began chiming with priority alerts as more reports arrived. The scope of the human assault was becoming clear. This wasn't a random attack or a desperate strike by a cornered species. This was a carefully planned military campaign designed to bring down the Empire's 3,000-year dominance. Sir, another aide approached High Overlord Vexithara. We're receiving a transmission addressed to the High Command. The source appears to be human. Put it through, she ordered grimly. The central display resolved into the image of Commander Chen, looking exactly as calm and confident as she had when facing Vexitar's fleet. Behind her, human technicians worked at stations that seemed to be processing massive amounts of data in real time. Greetings, High Overlords of the Zalathi Empire, Chen said politely. I am Commander Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the Terran Federation. I thought it was time we had a proper conversation. You dare attack the Empire? High Overlord Zenkari snarled. We will crush you like the insects you are. Chen's expression didn't change. You tried that once before, High Overlord. How did that work out for you? What do you want? High Overlord Vexithara asked, cutting off Zenkari's angry response. Justice, Chen replied simply. 300 years ago, your empire committed genocide against my species. You destroyed our worlds, killed our people, and tried to erase us from existence. We want you to answer for those crimes. The expansion of the empire is the natural order, High Overlord Timos declared. Inferior species must give way to superior ones. It is the law of evolution. Is it? Chen asked. Then you won't mind if we apply that same law to you. After all, we seem to have evolved beyond your ability to stop us." The truth of those words hit the chamber like a physical blow. The humans were demonstrating their superiority in the most direct way possible, by defeating Imperial forces with contemptuous ease. "You cannot defeat the entire Empire," High Overlord Vexithara said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "We're not trying to defeat the Empire," Chen corrected. "We're trying to free it." "What does that mean?" Chen smiled, and for the first time Vextar saw genuine warmth in the expression. "It means we're giving every species you've conquered the same gift you gave us, the gift of adversity, the motivation to become something better than they were." As she spoke, the display behind her lit up with star charts showing Imperial space. But these charts were different from any the overlords had seen before. They showed supply lines, communication networks, political tensions, and economic dependencies. They showed the Empire's infrastructure in more detail than the Empire's own strategists possessed. "For 300 years, we've been doing more than just preparing to fight you," Chen continued. "We've been making contact with every species you've oppressed, every rebel group you've crushed, every resistance movement you've driven underground. We've been sharing our technology, our tactics, our knowledge. We've been teaching them the same lessons you taught us." The implications were staggering. If the humans had been secretly supporting resistance movements throughout the Empire, if they had been sharing advanced technology with subjugated species. "The attacks on our outer systems," Vextar whispered. "Those aren't just human ships." "Very good, Admiral," Chen nodded approvingly. "Some of them are human vessels, yes, but others are ships crewed by Altarians who remember the bombardment of their homeworld. Vegan survivors who haven't forgotten the slave camps. Korthak refugees whose children were taken for Imperial experiments. They've all been waiting for this moment, Admiral. The moment when they could strike back." The chamber erupted in chaos as the overlords began shouting orders. Mobilize the fleets, secure the core systems, activate the emergency protocols. But Vextar could see the fear in their eyes. They were beginning to understand that this wasn't just a military attack. It was a revolution. "You've made a mistake," High Overlord Vexithara said, struggling to maintain her composure. "You've united your enemies against a common threat. Now every species in the galaxy will see that the Empire can be defeated." "Yes," Chen agreed cheerfully. "That was rather the point. You see, High Overlords, the Empire's greatest weakness was always its arrogance. You believed that superior technology and overwhelming force could maintain order forever. But you forgot the most important lesson of evolution. When the environment changes, those who cannot adapt become extinct." "And you think you can adapt better than we can?" High Overlord Zenkari challenged. "I know we can," Chen replied, "because we've already done it once. 300 years ago you nearly exterminated us. Instead, you made us stronger. You gave us the motivation to become something you couldn't defeat. Now we're returning the favor." The transmission ended, leaving the overlords staring at blank screens while emergency reports continued to flood in from across the Empire. Rebellion on Altair. Slave uprising on Vega. The entire Korthak system in revolt. Communications lost, with the Proxima sector. Vextar looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia, and saw something he had never expected to see. Fear. Not just fear of military defeat, but fear of irrelevance. Fear that their time was ending. "What are your orders?" he asked quietly. High Overlord Vexithara was silent for a long moment, her ancient mind processing the scope of the crisis facing the Empire. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of absolute power that was suddenly no longer absolute. "Recall all fleets to the core systems," she ordered. "Prepare for siege warfare, and send word to every system in the Empire. The humans have returned, and they're not alone." As Vextar left the chamber to carry out his orders, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing the end of an age. The empire that had seemed eternal was revealing itself to be just another civilization that had grown too comfortable, too confident, too sure of its own superiority. The humans had learned from their defeat and become stronger. Now it was the Empire's turn to learn the same lesson. But Vextar wondered if they would prove to be as good students as humanity had been. The hunter had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. 2 years had passed since the first human ships had emerged from the quarantine zone, and the galaxy was unrecognizable. Admiral Vextar, now holding the lesser title of System Commander, stood in the ruins of what had once been the Empire's greatest shipyard. Around him, teams of mixed species worked together to salvage what they could from the massive construction facilities that had once built the Empire's dreadnoughts. The irony was not lost on him. Altarian engineers worked alongside former Imperial technicians. Vegan scientists shared data with Zalathi researchers. Korthak laborers took orders from human supervisors without complaint or conflict. The species that had been enemies for millennia were now cooperating as if they had always been allies. Commander Vextar, a voice called behind him. He turned to see Commander Chen approaching, her uniform now bearing the insignia of the Galactic Confederation. Over the past 2 years, she had become something of a legend throughout known space. The human who had brought down the Empire without destroying it. Commander Chen, he replied, offering the respectful bow that had become customary in their interactions. I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to check on the reconstruction progress, she said, looking around at the bustling work sites. And I wanted to talk to you about something. They walked together through the facility, past workers of dozens of different species, all focused on the same goal. Building something new from the wreckage of the old. It was a scene that would have been impossible during the Empire's reign, when each species had been kept strictly segregated and controlled. You could have destroyed us, Vextar said quietly as they walked. Your fleets, your technology, your allies. You could have wiped out every Zalathi in the galaxy, and no one would have questioned your right to revenge. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Yes, we could have. Many of our allies wanted us to. The Altarians especially were eager to see your species suffer as theirs had suffered. But that would have made us no better than the Empire we were fighting. Then why didn't you? Because destruction is easy, Chen replied. Creation is hard. Anyone can tear down an empire. Building something better in its place takes wisdom, patience, and hope. We had learned those lessons during our exile. They stopped at an observation platform that overlooked the main construction bay. Below them, the skeleton of a new kind of ship was taking shape. It incorporated design elements from every major species in the galaxy. A fusion of technologies that represented cooperation rather than conquest. The first ship of the Confederation fleet, Chen explained, built by representatives of every species, using the best ideas from all our cultures. It's a symbol of what we can accomplish when we work together, instead of fighting each other. Vextar studied the vessel with professional interest. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, clearly designed for exploration and peaceful contact rather than conquest and subjugation. What will you call her? The New Dawn, Chen replied. The first of many, we hope. And what of my people? What place do the Zalathi have in this new order? Chen turned to look at him directly, her expression serious. The same place as every other species. You'll be judged by your actions from now on, not by your past. Some of your people have already proven themselves valuable allies. You among them. It was true. Despite everything that had happened, some Zalathi had adapted to the new reality with surprising grace. They had shared their advanced technology willingly, contributed their expertise to reconstruction efforts, and proven that they could work alongside former subjects as equals rather than masters. Not all of my people see it that way, Vextar admitted. There are still those who dream of restoring the Empire, who believe this is all temporary. I know, Chen said sadly. We've been monitoring the resistance movements. The die-hard loyalists, who refuse to accept that the old ways are gone forever. But they're becoming fewer every day. Most Zalathi are discovering that cooperation brings better results than domination. A chime from Chen's communication device interrupted their conversation. She listened to the brief message, then smiled. Good news. The Korthak delegation has agreed to join the Confederation officially. That makes 47 species who have chosen to participate in the new government. And how many have chosen isolation instead? 12 so far, Chen replied. Including the Zalathi core worlds, they've withdrawn from galactic politics entirely, choosing to focus on their own internal affairs rather than engage with the Confederation. Vexatar felt a pang of sadness at the thought of his homeworld turning inward, rejecting the changes, sweeping through the galaxy. But he understood the decision. For many of his people, accepting the new order meant acknowledging that everything they had believed about their superiority was wrong. That was a difficult truth to face. What about the Empire's old territories? He asked. The systems that were too small or weak to maintain independence? Most have joined the Confederation as well, Chen explained. We're not interested in ruling them the way the Empire did. Each member world maintains its autonomy and makes its own decisions about internal affairs. The Confederation only handles intersystem disputes, trade regulations, and mutual defense. They began walking again, heading toward the administrative section of the facility. Along the way, they passed memorials to the species that had been lost during the Empire's expansion. Entire civilizations that had been wiped out. Their only remembrance now these simple monuments to their existence. Do you ever regret it? Vextar asked suddenly. The way you brought down the Empire? The chaos and suffering that followed? Chen stopped walking and was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of difficult decisions made in impossible circumstances. Every day, she admitted. War always brings suffering even when it's justified. Innocent beings died in the fighting. Families were separated. Entire worlds had to rebuild from scratch when their imperial administrators fled. I carry the responsibility for all of that. But you'd do it again? Yes, she said without hesitation. Because the alternative was worse. The Empire was a cancer that was slowly consuming the galaxy. Every year it continued to exist meant more species conquered, more cultures destroyed, more beings enslaved. We had to act. They reached the Memorial Garden, a quiet space filled with plants from worlds throughout the galaxy. At its center stood a simple stone monument, bearing names in hundreds of different scripts, the species that had been lost to imperial expansion over the millennia. This is why we fought, Chen said, placing her hand on the monument. Not for revenge, though we certainly wanted that. We fought to make sure this never happened again, to create a galaxy where no single species could dominate all the others. And you believe the Confederation will be different? I believe it has a better chance, Chen replied. The Empire's mistake was thinking that unity could be imposed through force. The Confederation is based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. If it fails, it will be because the species involved chose to make it fail, not because they were forced to accept something against their will. As they walked back toward the main complex, Vextar reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The galaxy that had once trembled before imperial fleets now bustled with free trade and open communication between species. Wars still occurred, but they were local conflicts rather than campaigns of conquest. Most importantly, no single power dominated the others. There's something I've been curious about, Vextar said as they reached the transport platform. The quarantine zone that contained your space. How did you maintain it for 3 centuries without the Empire noticing what was really happening? Chen smiled mischievously. Trade secret. But I will say this, the Empire's own arrogance was our greatest ally. You convinced yourselves that the zone was empty, so you never looked closely enough to see what was really there. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. And now? Now we don't need to hide anymore. Terran space is no longer forbidden. It's open to anyone who comes in peace. We've gone from being the galaxy's greatest secret to being one of its founding members. As Vextar's transport lifted off to return him to his duties, he looked back at the construction facility where former enemies worked side by side to build a better future. It wasn't the galaxy he had grown up in, wasn't the universe he had served faithfully for decades. But perhaps that wasn't such a bad thing. The Empire had taught the galaxy many lessons over its 3,000-year reign. It had shown that superior technology could overcome numerical disadvantages. It had demonstrated that organization and discipline could triumph over chaos and disorder. It had proven that a single vision, ruthlessly implemented, could reshape entire sectors of space. But in the end, the Empire had also taught its greatest lesson by example, that arrogance and inflexibility were fatal weaknesses, that treating other species as inferior would eventually create enemies capable of bringing down even the mightiest civilization, that true strength came not from domination, but from cooperation. The humans had been excellent students of that lesson. They had taken everything the Empire taught them, about technology, about organization, about the importance of unity, and had used it to create something better. Something that enhanced rather than suppressed the diversity that made the galaxy so rich and fascinating. As his transport approached his new headquarters, Vextar opened a communication channel to the Confederation Council chambers on New Geneva, the human world that had become the informal capital of the New Order. "Commander Chen," he said when her image appeared on screen, "I've been thinking about our conversation today." "What about it?" "You said that destruction is easy and creation is hard. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what you meant." Chen's smile was warm and genuine. "Understanding is the first step toward wisdom, Commander. And wisdom is what we'll need if we're going to make this new galaxy work." The transmission ended, leaving Vextar alone with his thoughts as his transport descended toward the landing platform. Around him, the lights of a dozen different species ships moved through the traffic patterns, carrying goods and passengers between worlds that had once been forbidden from direct contact. The Empire was gone, but its legacy lived on, not in monuments to conquest or archives of subjugated species, but in the hard-won knowledge that the galaxy was vast enough for all its children to thrive. The Terran Federation had kept its promise. They had created something greater from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The galaxy's everything had been lost to the Empire's arrogance, just as the humans had warned. But from that loss, something far greater had been born. A galaxy where strength was measured not by how many worlds you could conquer, but by how many species you could call friends. It was a lesson worth learning, even if it had taken the destruction of an empire to teach.